When her dad died, that's when the trouble began.
Gotcha.
What can you tell us what you mean about trouble beginning when he passed?
Well, because whoever done this to her would not have done that had her dad been alive.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
Who Killed Letha? An interview with Letha's best friend, Shannon Crawley. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. We are at Madison County Library today. We have with us Miss Shannon Crawley. Shannon, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Mr. David, how are you over there?
Good. This is just another important piece of Letha Rutherford's case. Is again to learn who Letha was, and there's no better way to do that than talk to the people who were Titus and best friends at the time of her disappearance. And Shannon, that's you. So thank you for coming and sharing your story about Letha. This is important.
Thank you. It's very long overdue, in my opinion.
I would tend to agree.
We
32
agree.
years. 32 years. So.
Well, Shannon, you've told me that Letha was your best friend. So why don't you tell us a little bit and tell our listeners who Letha was?
Well, Letha and I were kids of kind of the same neighborhood. We didn't live in the same neighborhood, but we had mutual friends, and she had some family that, came around there, and we met through some other people, and we hit it off, and we became inseparable, and she became family. Like my big sister, she was a couple years older than me, and we were inseparable.
Yeah, it's nice to have those kinds of friendships. Yeah, I've told David before when we had recorded one on my best friend who also was murdered, how, and I'm sure you and Letha were much the same.
Oh, yeah.
That best friend kind of becomes a soulmate best friend. Like you get to where you're reading each other's minds and movements and actions, and you know them so well, almost as well as you know your own self.
Exactly.
Speaking of that, what do you think it was that drew y'all together? I mean, what did you see in her, and what do you think she saw in you, or what kind of things did y'all have in common that made you so inseparable?
Well, I think for us, just being in the same circle of people, same background, she was a younger sister of a brother, and I was the younger sister of a sister who was pretty much a tomboy. We were close in age, and, this was the late 80s. So, you really didn't have anything to do but meet friends and hang around and run up and down the country roads and just be kids, teenagers.
Especially out there where y'all were, off Jacks Creek and Dry Branch and everything. For people that aren't familiar with the area, that's a rural part of Fayette County.
Yeah. Now, she was from that area. I was not.
Gotcha.
She had family who lived on Union Mill, which is on the Jessamine County side. But like I was telling Wendy, all that runs together because it's rural. She had, family that worked in tobacco and fixed people's cars. And, they, like I said, we all just knew everybody. Her father, knew the same people. And, it was just so small. And there was a little store that we would all gather at, and we would just have fun and just be kids. Neither one of us were driving at the time, so we would just walk the neighborhood and meet up with other people and just hang out. And, she had an older brother, so when he started driving, we would ride around with him and just do our typical teenage stuff.
For sure. Any idea where that little store was at?
It was on a road called Logana Road. The building's still there, but it's closed. And then there was another store that was closer to where she lived, and that's called Spears Store. There was two stores. There was a Spears Country Store, which was like right on the corner of Tate's Creek and Spears. And then there was another one. We called one the country store and one the regular store. Because one store the people that owned it, Dawn and Irene, they would cook food, and that's where a lot of migrant workers would come out there because there's a lot of tobacco farms out there. Then you've got the river that goes down, Valley View and all that. And so we all just kind of migrated everywhere. It was kind of like right in the middle. But Logana was the most popular place for kids.
That's not too terribly far from our farm
No,
in Jessamine
it's
County.
not.
We come down Logana to
Yeah.
make it to Richmond. It's one of the routes we take. So
Yeah, and I lived on the corner of Union Mill and Logana, which at that time there was not that big house. And my dad had old cars, and everybody loved them, and people knew that that was my dad, and they would, come up there and be like, "Can I look at your cars?" And Letha's brother and cousins and everybody knew me, and we were all just really good friends.
Gotcha. We'll have to look for that place.
We
on
will. I
Logana.
think I know the little store she's talking about at the corner of going down towards the river. It's
Spears, we know Spears.
yeah,
everybody.
that's a
the
neat little
Spears store.
little store.
The entire area is gorgeous. The
Oh,
entire
yeah.
area is
It
gorgeous.
is very
For
beautiful.
the local listeners, we're talking about it. It butts right up to Raven Run Sanctuary, which is a place that people in Lexington have flocked to for years when the weather's right and whatnot. So, more about you and Letha and who she was. Can you tell us when you met her and when you hung out with her? What was her personality like? What was home life like? And stuff like that. Just see if we can paint a picture of who Letha is.
Well, when I first met her, her father was still living. He eventually passed with a heart attack. But when I first met her, neither one of us drove. I was probably about 12 or 13. They lived out in the rural country. It was just your typical home life. I mean, her dad, she was a daddy's girl. And I mean, he always he let her do whatever she wanted to, but she knew what not to do because she knew that if he didn't like it, she would get disciplined, and not anything bad, but just she knew he didn't like that. He worked for a blacktop company, so we would always go places with him. Sometimes we would go with him to pick up his check, and he would take us to McDonald's. Back then that was like
That was a
big
big
thing.
thing,
Oh
wasn't it?
yeah,
I think the ice cream machine worked back then too.
yeah, for sure.
Maybe
That's
not.
back when the burgers were burgers, but we didn't really do anything special. They lived out in the country. They had game roosters. We would, go out with him and check on the chickens, and then they would go and do their little cockfighting things. And we were just always on the move. If we weren't at her house, we were at my house. If we weren't there, we were running around with her cousins because she's really the only girl.
Gotcha.
She was very tomboy,
Yes, I was going to ask
very
about that in a
tomboy.
minute. Yeah.
But she could be feminine when she wanted to be, which I was a tomboy. I mean, I think all the girls in our neighborhood were tomboys because we had boy cousins, or we had boys out there that were like our brothers, and they would, beat us up and teach us to be tough, But her home life, it was, good until her dad died. And then when her dad died, things weren't so good. But it was always fun. And then when she started driving, her dad had bought her a little yellow gremlin. And we thought we were like Thelma and Louise.
No.
We thought we were on top of the world. And I remember she had a gremlin, and the front grill, it was kind of broken. And so her dad was always rigging things up. And they had put a chain through it one time to keep it from, coming open and the hood flying up. And we would drive so fast down Spears Road, and we'd jump the hills, and we'd just giggle, and we'd just have a good time. It was just me and her. When I got my driver's license, she and I and a couple of guys we knew that we were friends, we went to the Winchester Drive-In, which isn't there anymore. And I mean, we thought we was on top of the world. I had a Mustang, one of my old Mustangs, and we just thought we were really doing something. But we were just two little young teenage girls that didn't care about tomorrow. We were living for today. So.
Yeah. Living your best life.
That's right.
Or so we thought.
Yeah, exactly. Now, going
Yeah.
back to where she was raised and stuff like that, I remember when we talked before that, tell us about her house. Not that not to demean it, but I don't think people understand how rural parts of this county could be in the 80s.
So when you go down Spears Road, you're going to turn on to Jacks Creek. And Jacks Creek's going to go down towards the river, opposite of going like towards I-75. So when you would go down, it was all country, and her road would veer off of Jacks Creek at Dry Branch, and you go on down Dry Branch, and it would white off. And when you would go to that, it was a dead end. And I think her home at one time, years before they ever lived in it as a house, might have been like a little general store, like long time ago. And it was small, about 3 rooms, maybe 4. It had a kitchen sink that ran off the well, but there was no indoor facilities as far as bathrooms and things like that. But, you know, they lived primitive, and I loved going down there because I got to live primitive too, you know, and it was just fun. And I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere. There's a river that runs somewhere down through there. I never went that far, but we would just hang out in the house. She had a washing machine, one of those old wringer washers. And I remember her washing the clothes off of that. And I was like, oh my God, let me do it, you know, because to me, that was fun. So I felt like she lived fun.
And ironically enough, there's people now that work really hard to live what's called off-grid. And that's, you know, because I've always been attracted to that primitive stuff too a little bit. That's why I found it, because I think, didn't you say before they had a dirt floor? Was it?
I think it was dirt. Again, that's been so long ago. I know it was either dirt or very, very old wood.
No, that would make sense.
Yeah.
It would be that. But
yeah,
that's the thing. I think it's funny when we see people live like that, but some of us look at that as the weekend getaway or the getaway.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, too neat. So
for sure.
It's
But you know, I never thought anything less of the way she lived or where she was at. I mean, my dad delivered mail. We had a big, 3-bedroom, big ranch style home in a rural, like in a suburb, which you all know that area. It's kind of suburban, but rural, I guess. But I'd rather stayed with her than where I was at because we had so much fun. People were always down there. Like I said, she had an older brother. His friends would come, and then their cousins would come, and everybody. But that was like the fun hangout place. Right. A lot of people went to their house, like from Nicholasville, Lexington, things like that, because they were a well-known family.
Well, that's neat. That's no good thing to get this out 30-some-odd years later, is to tickle the memories of all those people, which I think is the goal, is to get that out too. So, but going back to her again too, what were her like favorite things? If she had particular things that really, I knew you said before she fought, because the tomboy in her is that.
Yeah. She liked to go to the chicken fights.
Okay.
I think, like I said, I think that's just because that was bred in her. She liked to be adventurous. We liked to go places and do things. And she didn't really have anything specific that I can recall. Again, it's been so long since she's been gone that there are things I'm sure I don't exactly remember, but she just really loved hanging out with her friends, and my family adored her. Like they loved her. A lot of times she and I would just go to my sister's house, which my sister's passed away now. She had cancer. She died in 2017, but I mean, she looked at Letha as her little sister.
Gotcha.
I remember that, like, my sister's in-laws, they would have derby parties. They would have Halloween parties, everything. And, we could go down there and do whatever we wanted because, my sister was like, well, y'all do whatever you want to. You're, 16, 17 years old. Whatever, go wild. We don't care. Just don't drive. So, and we would go to the Jessamine Joree at that time. That's when they still had it. And we would go to the Jamboree and we would walk around and we would ride kick booty. That was our favorite ride. That's when they would ride the swings and kick each other off and then grab each other in the air. Yeah, that was what she loved to do. Of course, she was so young and hadn't really experienced a whole lot of adventure yet. Yeah, in my opinion. So I think that for Letha, she just loved to enjoy life.
Yeah.
She didn't really, I never really seen a lot bother her except for when her father passed away. That really destroyed her because they were super, super close.
Yeah, that's
So when the father passed, who took over the role of taking care of the household?
Her brother.
Her brother.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just the two of them at that point?
Yes.
Gotcha.
So I guess he had to kind of step up and be a dad role,
Yeah.
really, to his sister.
Yeah.
Did she share with you, I guess, those intimate feelings of how, losing her dad was? I'm sure as any best friend, she probably confided in you. And
Oh, yeah. She was very, very sad and very lost. I mean, her daddy was her world. Her and her father had more of a bond than her and her mom. And her and her brother were like inseparable, which they're only, I think, a couple of years apart. He's maybe 2, maybe 3 years older than her.
so did they anticipate he was having heart trouble, or did they just find him
I think it
passed?
was just a massive heart attack. I don't think that there was any indications. He was 54, which isn't old.
That's young.
Yeah.
That's young.
I don't really know what led up to it, but I remember she had called me when it had happened, and she was very, very.
Had she come home and
lost.
found him?
I don't recall how they found him. Maybe he had went to the hospital and he died that way. I wouldn't really know that because, again, it's been so long ago. I think he died in like 1991. I think he died the same year she went missing.
That strikes, if not very close.
Yeah.
I think you're right. there.
And I think when her dad died, that's when the trouble began.
Gotcha.
What can you tell us what you mean about trouble beginning when he passed?
Well, because whoever done this to her would not have done that had her dad been alive.
So Shannon, her dad had passed, and then ultimately what ended up happening is Letha shortly thereafter went missing. Is that correct?
Yes.
About how long was it before she disappeared?
Now, don't quote me on this because I don't know exact dates, but I feel like he died around July-ish, and she went missing in December. So about 6-ish months, give or take.
So do you recall when she was missing? Was it just you were trying to call her so you all could hang out, or how did you come to learn about her missing?
Well, I had been at another friend's house a few houses down because at the end, before she went missing, we still hung out, but we weren't as inseparable. I don't know what she had going on, but we were still very, very close. And one night I was at another friend's house that lived like 4 houses down from me. And when I came home the next day, because my dad was a single dad. And everybody raised everybody's kids down there. So we ripped and ran and did what we wanted. So the next morning when I came home from my other friend's house, my dad said, Letha came by here looking for you last night. And I said, well, where'd she go? Like, did she say anything? Because I was really wanting to talk to her because I hadn't really got to talk to her much. And he's like, well, no, but she seemed to be a little distressed about something. And I said, well, did you ask questions? He's like, no, I just told her I'd let you know. And I never heard from her again. I called and I talked to her brother and couldn't find her. So then me and another friend of ours who lived with Letha at one time, her name was Carmen. She's deceased now. We went everywhere looking for her. We went Wilmore. We went Lexington, Richmond, everywhere that we knew she might be, calling people that she knows. And then her brother was like, I'm going to file a missing persons on her. And that was it.
So had her brother just come home and she wasn't there, or waking up and she wasn't there?
I don't know for sure exactly how that transpired. I just know that, like I said, he was older than us. So he may have been out, with his friends, or he may have been out working somewhere. But I had called him and I was like, he's like, I haven't seen her. Is she with you? And I'm like, no. So, of course, you got to wait 24 to 48 hours, whatever it was at that time. And then he called and explained, she's a minor. Or was she 18 yet? I can't remember. She went missing, and she was 18. That's what it was. She had just turned 18, and I think they were like, well, she's an adult now. We have to give it some time, because had she been like 12 or 13, it'd have been a different story. And then they gave it some time, and she never showed up. And then that's when he called, and whatever happened from there with the police.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, and just to go back to when you and your friends were looking for her, just to emphasize where she lived and went missing from is not just rural, but heavily wooded.
Very.
I mean, we're talking thick. And so for the listeners, they can go to murderpolicepodcast.com and pull the show notes, and I'll put some images up. But obviously, if you're on YouTube, those are on this episode right now, and those will be available for people to see, just to get an idea of that. Even not going to Wilmore or Lexington, just to look within a mile of that house would have been a task.
Yes, very much so, especially someone that's not an experienced investigator.
Sure.
That knows where to look, knows what to do, and things like that. Like I said, you know, when she was growing up, her dad and them, and cousins and uncles, they all had, you know, chickens. So I would think about places that we had been. And then I thought, well, let's go check there in that town, you know. And I mean, we looked everywhere, and we had no luck.
That was good work, by the way, is that going to places that, because the police don't know those things. And the family and the friends do. That's always something everybody's grateful for, because the people that know her best know where the likelihood of finding her is. So she goes missing.
So then days turn into weeks, I guess, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you all do at that point? Do you just wait to maybe hear from the police, or maybe she'll come rolling in home and talking about an excursion she's been on for a couple of days? Yeah,
and you know, with Letha, she, like I said, she liked to run around. She liked to have fun. So at first I thought, well, maybe she was coming to tell me she's going somewhere for the weekend. Or maybe she wanted me to come with her. And then I got to thinking, well, maybe she was scared. Maybe something was going on. Maybe she needed a place to stay for the night, because my dad said she was, you know, she appeared to be distraught. You know, when I was thinking that. I mean, I've thought everything from the best to the worst. Then I was thinking, well, you know, maybe she wanted me to go with her to take care of something that night. And who knows what that would have led to. Maybe both of us being missing and murdered. I didn't really know what to think. But I knew that after a few days, it wasn't her. I knew that something was wrong. About a week later, I felt that. And it was close to Christmas. The newspaper says November, but I'm pretty sure that it was December. Mm-hmm. December the 16th.
Yeah, December sounds right.
But the papers, the papers from the old articles and these other people that have covered it say November, but it was December, because it was cold and it was snowing a little bit. That's when we had winters back then, not like what we have now. But I just knew something wasn't right after a couple of days.
So I guess, did you stay in touch with her brother, and you all kind of stayed connected as far as, have you heard anything? No, have you heard anything?
We didn't stay connected every single day, but I would, you know, reach out to him from time to time. And then at that time, like I said, our friend Carmen was still living. And, you know, I would reach out to her. If you heard from Little Hog, if you heard from, you know, Joe Bob, which was a cousin, if you heard from Philip, which Philip's passed now. A lot of these people that were in our circle have passed away. But, you know, have you talked to this one, or have you talked to that one? Did you think to call so-and-so, or did you all think to look here? Like, what are we going to do?
Just trying to rack your brain and come up with anything. Mm-hmm. So at what point, I guess some months go on, and it just kind of, you all are kind of still looking, but nothing's turning up. Mm-hmm. And then I guess in April, she was discovered? Yes. So can you talk about when you learned she was discovered and what that discovery was?
Yeah. So it was late. It was probably 1 or 2 o'clock morning when I got the phone call from a family member of hers. And he said that he had discovered something out on the farm, or I wouldn't really say farm, out on the land. He had a 4-wheeler. He was riding just leisurely riding, and he had his dog with him, which was a pit bull. And he was just riding, and he said that the dog just stopped in its tracks and it wouldn't come. And he yelled for the dog to come on. Well, the dog was just not moving. So he turns around and he goes back to where the dog was, and he's seen something sticking out of a piece of tin. He said he pulled it up, and there she was, her remains.
Wow. Under the tin on the property where she lived.
Where the police had already been with a fine-tooth comb and dogs and horseback and people. And then now all of a sudden she's found 4 months later.
Which kind of would make me, you know how my mind works, David, make me think she was somewhere else and someone placed her under the tin and then she was mysteriously found.
Yes.
You never know. That's always a good possibility. Is that we know people are moved sometimes in the wake of an event like that.
Exactly.
So did this person end up calling the police or her brother, or who did they contact, or do you know those details?
I'm not sure who he contacted. I just know that I just hung up the phone and just, my world was destroyed. Like, I cried. My dad was away at a treatment center because he had struggled with some mental health. And I called my dad, and I was bawling. It was like they found her. And so he came home, and then my dad became like super protective mode because, you know, he knew she was my best friend.
Sure.
And a father's mind, now that I have children, he's thinking, okay, well, if my daughter's next, is probably what my dad was thinking, and he became super protective. And so, I mean, I didn't really go a lot of places after that discovery was made. I did go to her funeral service. I wouldn't really call it a funeral service. It was a casket with her skeletal remains.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I guess at that point, her did you stay in touch with her brother, or did you all kind of just lose touch and
just kind of drifted away a little bit? I feel like when she passed, and it was, you know, it was proven that was her and that she was no longer here. I think everybody just kind of went their own separate ways. She was kind of like the glue that held our group together.
Were you ever interviewed?
Yes.
You were. How did that go? What, I guess as a best friend, they were hoping you might know something or give some lead.
I was a minor at the time, so my dad had to give them permission. And so I was just very frank with them, very candid. There were things in her diary they asked me about. I answered truthfully. But I told them I really couldn't give them any insight as to what happened to her.
Gotcha. That had to tear your world up, though.
It did. I also remember when she was found, I called my sister because my sister was like my second mom. And I lost it. And you know, my sister was very upset too, because like I said, we were all so close with her.
Right. When during the time she was missing, did you find yourself preparing yourself for those worst news things, or was that balanced by a lot of hope? How'd that feel?
I think like I said, I just had that gut feeling after 2 weeks at the most, and I was driving myself crazy, wanting to know where she was. Who did this? Why did they do that to her? Like, what did she do what did she deserve to be treated like a piece of trash? Like, throwing her out there like she was nothing. That was somebody's sister.
Right.
Somebody's best friend. Somebody's world.
Somebody only 18 that hadn't been out in the world yet to arguably make anybody mad. That's the way I look at things like that too. Just cruel and evil. I mean, back then everybody fought and they made up. So I mean, I don't think that it was anybody that she had ever, had hurt like that would want that done to her. Right.
I think that whoever did this to her had a very personal problem with her. But for the love of God, I don't know who that would have been.
Right. At the time of this recording, when we're making this, we're probably a good 32 years out, if I remember correctly, time-wise, right on top of that.
Yes.
And I know nothing of any motion on it. I know that it's still down at police headquarters somewhere that a cold case detective could grab if they had a break. But what would be the best outcome for this right now for you? And I know it doesn't bring Letha back, but if you could picture the best thing moving forward, that if you had a magic wand tonight, what would that look like?
Well, I don't really want to know how it happened because that's irrelevant to me. I don't want to think about that. I want to know why. Why would whoever did this do this to her? You know, what did she know something about you that you didn't want known? You know, did she reject you in some way and you couldn't handle the rejection? Why did you do it? Why didn't you just go on and leave her alone and just let her live her life? Well, I mean, she was 18 years old. Like, what can an 18-year-old kid do? Like, my children are 22 and 29 years old. And to me, 18 years old is a baby. So, you know, what did this child do to you? And why did you take her life? That's all I want to know. Why?
Gotcha.
And I'd like to see this person rot in jail for the rest of their life.
For sure. What would you say to that person right now if they were listening and we don't know who that is? What would you say? Would you ask of them? Would you give them advice? Would you demand anything? What would that sound like?
Honestly, I don't know what I would say. 20 years ago, I'd probably punched them in the face. But now I'm older and, you know, that doesn't resolve anything. But I would say I hope nobody ever does this to your child.
Gotcha. So somebody's out there carrying that on their heart that they know. Let's go to another group of people to talk to. What would you say to somebody that knew? Now, we're not going to get into the rumors on the podcast because of the case facts that might be present in those. But there's lots of rumors, right? And we'll leave those be because we don't go into rumor. But those rumors, if there was anything to them, would lead me to believe that people know that may not have been involved. What would you say to somebody that is walking around carrying that right now, that they have the information, they could go to the police and say this person or these people are the ones responsible? What would you say to them if they're walking around, going to church, going to stores, going to movies, living their life, knowing that they have that night? What would you say to somebody like that?
I would probably first ask them, why didn't you do something to help save her life?
Yes.
Would you want your daughter done that way? And I hope you burn in hell for what you know.
I think that's a strong possibility. I've said that many times before, that if you carry that on your heart, you're probably not too far from that person that was involved.
Well, and it makes you wonder also if a person on the outside knows of what happened, why have they not turned in the person or people who did it? Why are you protecting them? Of course, like you said, it can't bring Letha back, but the guilt that person hopefully, and maybe don't even have guilt, but the guilt they should feel knowing, I know this, and I know that this person or these people are out there walking around and has never had to pay for what they've done to her. I can't imagine trying to protect somebody who I know killed, really, by all accounts, a child and murdered her. You know, we know that there's some cases that we've heard about or talked about, and it doesn't make it right, but maybe there's an OD and you don't know what to do with the body, so you just put it somewhere. Not that that's okay, but this young lady was murdered, and you know someone did this to her. Why are you protecting the person who murdered her? Why is their life more valuable, and why should they be allowed to walk around having committed this murder?
I think it's fear of the
person or people.
Yeah.
Could be.
Yes.
You know, like he said, we won't get into the rumors, but of the rumors, I think the said person, that people were afraid of that person. And maybe fear of their own safety, their own
Sure.
family, you know, but how would that person know who said anything? Because a lot of people could have been there. I don't know. But all I know is that I think a lot of people didn't tell out of fear.
Sure. And now we know there's the anonymous tip line. And, you know, I don't know how that would work along with this being a cold case, so to speak. But still, someone should at least have the courage to speak up. I understand the fear aspect, and people want to kind of stay out of it for fear of retaliation. But 30 some years later, why are you still letting that person by with this?
Exactly. And the thing, though, about anonymous tips, people lie all the time.
Right.
How do we
Right.
know what's real and what's not? You know what I mean?
That's right.
Welcome to the life of an investigator.
Right.
Because you go through them. Tip lines will work. Tip lines, no matter where you go, if somebody provides the information, all that information, usually there's no problem with that getting back where it needs to be. So that's an option. And we could all agree that this is way overdue.
Very much
And it's
so.
just time to lay this down and get some justice for her.
Mhm.
One last person. If you could speak to Letha, what would you say today?
I would tell her that I miss her so much and that she's still my sister. And I would probably just tell her how I've, became a nurse, how successful my life has become. Not that I'm some millionaire, but people that came from our kind of lives, they don't really do a lot with themselves. A lot of them quit school and raise families and things like that. But I would just tell her of my accomplishments and, definitely tell her about my children and my grandchildren, because my daughter's uncle used to actually know her and they were all very close at one time. And so to know that my daughter is part of that family, she would really be tore up about it in a good way. I would just tell her that I really miss her and that I would love to see this person brought to justice and executed for it.
I think she probably knows all your accomplishments. I think that's what that's worth. $5 as she does. So, well, thank you for coming and sharing.
Yes, thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
for having me.
I think it's an important part to keep people motivated, to move them emotionally, to keep her name alive, and to with everything else that we'll have on the podcast when we interview other people, is to paint a picture of who Letha was. An 18-year-old woman living her best life, and Thelma and Louise around in a yellow gremlin. I'm picturing that now, by the way.
Yeah.
I've got a picture in my mind, and
Yeah.
shooting down Spears Road and jumping the jumps and everything. So.
Yeah, and we didn't have air conditioning, so we had the windows down, the hair blowing. My hair was longer than hers, but we had our little hairdos going on, and there was no fear. Tomorrow didn't matter. We're
Sure.
living today, so.
Yeah, until somebody interrupts that. So,
Yes.
But thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Shannon.
Thank you.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.